The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
Okay, who's cooler out of all these JTs? Justin Timberlake, JT Miller, aka Jonathan Tanner Miller, or Justin Trudeau? Who's cooler? Who knows?
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on, Kyle. Easy choice. It's Jonathan Tanner Miller. And speaking of easy choices, you made a good one by tuning in to Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks, and also a Canucks writer currently with the Daily Hive, Vancouver. Before we dive into today's episode, we got to thank you. I'm talking to you, baby, for tuning into Locked On Canucks. You know why? Because it is your Canucks every damn day. We're part of that Locked On Podcast Network. They're doing the most for sports fans across the world. And for our show, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go subscribe, like, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And hey, we aren't here without the sponsors, baby. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Go download that Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It's been one of the most incredible stories in the NHL over the past 5 years. And yeah, we might be biased because this is the home of the West Coast bias. But JT Miller going from a second-line winger, a guy who was hot-headed, a guy who had been up and down in the minors early in his career, to becoming not just a number one center, but one of the best centers in the NHL. And dare we say, a franchise player for the Vancouver Canucks. How did he get here? We're going to break down the story that is JT Miller's ascendance into one of the best players of all time in Vancouver. Let's get into it with my co-host, Kyle Bound. He's got Jonathan Tanner tattooed on his upper ass cheek. How's it going, brother?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do have a JT tramp stamp. If you're new to the program or just new to everything Kyle Bowen, you understand that I've never jumped off the bandwagon, okay? I never have. Now, it took me a while to get on, like 2 or 3 months, because I was still kind of jaded once this trade went down between Tampa and Vancouver all those years ago, right? But once I got on, I never got off, a.k.a. when everyone wanted this guy traded 13 months ago, 14 months ago, 27 months ago, I didn't. And it's crazy because I feel as if he's almost twice the player he was 13 months ago, because now he's added a whole element to his game. More on that in like 15 minutes. Kyle Bound, Trevor Beggs at the Don't Doze Art Lab, giving you this show called Locked On Canucks. Man, oh man, that West Coast bias, it's in our blood. That West Coast bias, it's also in JT Miller's blood. Like, I'm not going to go out there and call JT Miller a Canadian, but a part of me feels as if he's really, really proud to be from Vancouver. You know what I'm saying? Like, he bleeds that blue and green. And just read the title. I'm not joking. And we'll explain this at the very end of the episode. And maybe Trevor doesn't agree with this, but I think JT Miller's the face of the franchise. I do. And we're talking about a team that has Mr. 11.6, the alien. We're talking about a team that has a Norris Trophy winner. And here I am talking about a 31-year-old being the face of the franchise. You want to talk about the West Coast bias? How about that 31-year-old bias, okay? JT and I speak the same language. Anyways, let's talk about it. How did he get here? Okay, and why did he get here? Because guys like JT Miller, number one centers, they shouldn't be available. They shouldn't be traded twice. You get what I'm saying? And man, oh man, did Tampa make a mistake? Did the Rangers make a mistake? I think so.
Yeah, let's get to it from the beginning. And, for JT Miller, getting drafted 15th overall back in 2010, he's, of course, guys, when they enter the NHL draft, they're pretty much the best guy on their team all throughout their lives, right? And no, it was no different for JT Miller. But that being said, I think when you look at JT Miller's profile prior to the draft, he was always a very good, high-end player with some tools, but he's never projected to be a superstar. Like, no one projected JT Miller to come into the NHL and be an 100-point shutdown center. No one was saying that, right? And in fact, there's a lot of red flags about JT Miller going into the draft, and specifically, it was his temper, right? Which is what we've seen in Vancouver. He's an intense guy. And this is a quote from his U.S. National Development Program coach, Chad Cassidy, talking about JT Miller prior to the draft. He said, quote, "There were definitely red flags. The biggest thing for Millsy is that he gets so wrapped up in the game emotionally to the point where he'd lose emotional control. I remember times even in practice kicking him off the ice. He goes on to say that at the draft, every team was asking about JT. The one thing that I do remember feeling confidently comfortable telling teams was that although JT has a ways to go, he's a good kid who cares a lot about people and he cares a lot about his teammates. And once he puts it all together and figures it out, he's going to be a really special player.
Ooh.
So, I don't often trust guys named Chad, but I think Chad Cassidy knew what he was talking about there with JT Miller, because he has gone on to become a really special player. Now, he didn't become a special player with the team who drafted him, and that was the New York Rangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
With New York, he ended up being kind of as advertised, a hardworking second line winger, but he certainly went through some rough patches, right? And, a beloved figure in Vancouver, Alain Vigneault, was JT Miller's worst nightmare for a long time in New York, right? And, Kyle, I'm sure you made some mistakes as a young man, but
Oh, yeah.
I think, when people of authority in your early 20s tell you you're doing something wrong, you don't often take it well. And I don't think JT Miller was any different.
Oh, yeah, man. Oh, yeah. That, knowing how emotional he is and how, almost anyone with a lot of money who's young and who's also been one of the best athletes in their team setting for years and years and years will find it really hard to just, again, take feedback, be accountable, and all that jazz. And JT Miller being emotional, being young, possibly a little dumb. I'm pretty sure he said that about himself as well. It just wasn't going to work with the Rangers. It wasn't. And thank God, thank the hockey gods, that Alien Vigneault and the New York Rangers were trying to win. And we're trying to win ASAP, okay? And couldn't take the time to, decipher what JT Miller's junior coach or college coach or whatever it was saying about him, or, feeding into the specialty that was, again, JT Miller. Because if they did, they would have kept him. And there they were in win now mode, making big trades. And if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong on this. Was JT Miller part of the St. Louis trade? How did he get to Tampa Bay?
Okay, I'll get into that, but
Yeah.
I do want to touch on a couple more things about his time in New York,
Do it.
because again, it didn't start out great. In that 2013-14 season, like you said, the Rangers were winning. They actually went to
Yeah.
the Cup final. But for Miller, he described that season as hell. A year where you went to the Stanley Cup Finals, he described it as hell. And ironically, there's a Vancouver tie. He actually missed curfew while the team was
What?
on the road in Vancouver. And Alain Vigneault called him out publicly and ended up sending him back to the minors. And Miller had a quote about this. He said, "It sucked, but it's powerful in how it affects young players that think their shit doesn't stink. That's for sure." That Vigneault quote is something I'll remember forever, that you need to have a different level of professionalism and accountability. And he goes on to talk about the Cup Finals that year. And I thought this quote was interesting. He said, "I realized watching the Cup Finals that year against LA when we lost that I wanted to be playing in those games. To be honest, in the heat of that moment, you're thinking, let's just get this over with. And either way, I know I'm not in." And that's a crazy thing to say, right? Because you think a young guy watching the team that he's on going to the Stanley Cup Finals thinking maybe I'll get my shot. And he's just saying, let's get this over with. That really caught my attention. And he goes on to say it. That season was hell. There was every excuse to hate that season for me. And I very selfishly wanted to move past that and go to the next year. But at the same time, to see how much care and how much pride and how much every play mattered in the playoffs, that's you forever. I made a conscious decision that summer to get my you-know-what together. That year was a big part of my career. I had a chip on my shoulder and went back to camp 6 weeks early in New York and really put my best foot forward.
Wow.
And from there, Miller kind of lived up to it, right? And it's pretty impactful to hear him say that, having a teaching moment like that. And he came back a better player. That 2013-14 season where he spent, got demoted to the AHL 6 times. He had 3 goals and 6 points in 30 games. Came back the next season with 10 goals, 23 points in 58 games. And then from there kind of started his trajectory upwards, right? 22 goals, 43 points the next season, 22 goals, 56 points the next season. Just became better and better every season, but still nowhere near the superstar player that he is today.
Dude, what a shitty teammate, bro. Being up in the press box and just let's get this over with, Let's get this over with. The team's in the Stanley Cup Finals. He probably would say that too. I mean, he would do anything for his quote unquote teammates, but when you have that in your mind, that type of mantra while your boys are trying to fulfill their dreams, it's a little toxic, And by the sounds of it, JT Miller, man, somewhat of a toxic player at parts throughout his whole career. It's crazy because he's so emotional, right? And
Yeah.
that's a bit of a life lesson for anyone. And it's not just a hockey life lesson, it's just life in general. You really can't be okay with wearing your emotions on your sleeve 24/7. It's not fair for the people around you. It really isn't. And there
Yeah.
JT Miller was, by the sounds of it, being proud of that. Like being proud of caring so much. And again, that's some toxic attitude coming out of, again, the face of your Vancouver Canucks way back when.
Yeah, and again, I think you and I, Kyle, we're both a little different than we were in our early 20s. And obviously, JT Miller just saying, hey, this is 10 years ago now, right? 2013-14 is when this happened. We just finished the 2023-24 season. So JT Miller's played a lot of hockey since then. Let's get to the trade, and then we'll cut to break and get to the other side, because this Rangers trade, Kyle, you talked about, thank God the Rangers were winning games. Really, it was the Rangers' decision to rebuild as to why they traded JT Miller. I think people kind of forget that, because the Rangers sent out that letter in 2018 saying we're going to rebuild.
Yeah.
And then they kind of turned around quickly with Panarin and all that.
Okay, yeah. Can I guess the trade? Can I guess the trade?
Yeah.
Can I guess it? Sorry, because now you're making
Yeah.
me hurt. Like, okay, so it was like Ryan Callahan and company for St. Louis way back when, and was this the trade where it was like McDonough and JT Miller going to Tampa? Like, is that the
one.
trade? Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's the one. And the return, when you look back on it, is brutal. And if you look, kind of go scour the internet, Rangers fans are still ripping it to this day. So the Rangers gave up Ryan McDonough and JT Miller for Vlad Nemestikov, Brett Howden, Libor Hadchek, who I don't even barely played in NHL games, a first rounder, which ended up being Nils Lundqvist, who didn't work out in New York, and a second rounder, Carl Hendrickson, who never played in NHL games. That's what you gave up for Ryan McDonough, who helped Tampa win a Stanley Cup, and JT Miller, who's gone on to be one of the best players in the game today. And I would argue better than anyone on New York right now. Sorry, Artemi Panarin and Adam Fox.
That's crazy. That's how much of a high standard we have JT Miller on. But what an incredible player. What an outlier. And what a blessing that it did not work out for a young JT Miller in New York, for real. And again, the tie-in, everything happens for a reason. The fact that this guy missed curfew prior to a game against the Vancouver Canucks while he was on the Rangers, while Ali Vigneault was his coach, is, again, if you don't think the Canucks are going to win a Stanley Cup with this guy and it's all written, you got to read some Deepak Chopra. Anyways, Trevor Beggs, Kyle Bound, Locked On Canucks. We'll talk more about JT Miller and his time in Tampa Bay prior to, being moved in Jim Benning's best work ever. For real, Jim Benning is going to be he's going to be allowed to be a consultant down the road for like some shitty NHL team because of this trade alone. Okay, for real. Anyways, more on that in like 2 or 3 minutes. Beggsy, who we shouting out on Locked On Canucks?
All right, let's continue here on a Friday after we shouted our friends over at Game Time. You know the deal with Game Time. They are the only place you should be buying tickets. You know why? Because they got that the lowest price guarantee. You know what that means? If you find tickets cheaper elsewhere, Game Time, they will credit you with 110% of the difference, okay? Game Time, they mean business, baby. And if you're a fan of Major League Baseball, which I'm sure, at least 6% of our listeners are, they do make getting tickets for Major League Baseball faster and easier. And if that's what you like to do, grab a wiener, go watch some balls, you can do that by getting tickets on that Game Time app, because prices actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. Kyle, I'll ask you quickly, do you prefer the pitcher or the catcher?
The pitcher.
Good answer. Good answer,
right?
buddy.
Yeah.
Yep, good answer. On Game Time, whether you like to pitch or catch, you can find those last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concert, comedy, theater, and more. You can get flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, views from the seat, and of course that lowest price guarantee, baby. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download that Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Man, oh man. My name is Kyle Bound. That right there is Trevor Beggs. This right here is Locked On Canucks. And we're back at the Don't Doze Art Lab, giving you what we do every day here at the Don't Doze Art Lab. And that's that West Coast bias, right? We produce that, we send it off to the people, and we're going to be the glue, man. We're going to be the glue for the city. That's what it feels like. Anyway, speaking of being the glue, JT Miller is such a glue guy who happens to be a two-way force. How did he get there? We still have, 8 to 9 minutes before we get to that part of the story. Because right now, JT Miller is in Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay, man, Tampa Bay. How many good players has this organization had over the last 10, 12 years, for real? And JT Miller's time in Tampa Bay, it can be summarized in a lot of ways, but the fact that this guy was a part of the greatest regular season of all time, right, with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then having that team being swept by Columbus and him being ultimately shipped out of the building, 25 days later or 2 months later, is, in my opinion, something that he holds close to him. Because again, he leaves Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay at the time, a juggernaut in the regular season. He leaves, they win Stanley Cups, and I feel as if that's instinctively motivated this guy for years and years and years to come. Anyways, his time in Tampa Bay, how would you summarize it?
Yeah, I think it all plays into Miller's story and his career arc, right? I mean, this is a guy who is obviously very hard on himself, and some things are out of your control. If you get shipped out of a team, you can't control whether or not they win the Stanley Cup or not, but that's exactly what Tampa Bay did. But you look at JT Miller's short time in Tampa and kind of like his time in New York, where he was considered an inconsistent player. And, just for the everydayers, we compared Jake DeBrusk to JT Miller. I think there are some parallels here the more and more you think about it. Because JT Miller was a little inconsistent earlier in his career. But with Tampa, he was inconsistent as well. I mean, he gets traded to Tampa at that 2018 trade deadline. He has 18 points in 17 regular season games. So, one of the hottest streaks of his career. He goes into the playoffs. He largely plays with Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov. They go to the conference finals, and he posts 2 goals and 8 points in 17 games while playing with 2 of the best players in the NHL at that time. So I think that's another scenario where JT Miller's probably kicking himself, right? Because he had a golden opportunity in that postseason to make a difference. And yeah, Tampa did make the conference finals before losing to the Capitals. But JT Miller, I'm sure, believed he could have had a bigger impact.
Oh, dude, he still remembers that, man. He still thinks about that. Like, you know how some Canucks fans still think about him having an opportunity to tie the game up in Game 7? Remember at the end of Game 7 against the Oilers, and he has that clean look and it hits Zadorov in the foot? Definitely JT Miller's still thinking about that. And yeah, he's thinking about how he had 8 points playing with 2 Hall of Famers, right? Like Nikita Kucherov, fast forward to the now, he's putting up 140 points. That's how good that guy is. And bro, that's a big reason why Tampa got rid of him and needed to change. I wouldn't say their culture, but some of the scenery / open up different opportunities with those top guys, because yeah, Miller was good and yeah, Miller was young and they gave up a lot to get him during that time, right? I know they fleeced him in retrospect, but at the time you're giving up a lot of assets for this winger. But man, oh man, it's not working out and he can't get the job done in the playoffs. And I mean, if you look at his stats in the playoffs with Tampa, I feel as if, again, it was like the nail in the coffin for this guy having any success there.
Yeah, and again, sometimes, it's the reverse of the Nikita Zadorov situation where sometimes you can overjudge a player based on their playoff contributions. Like I would argue maybe Boston has done that with Lindholm and Zadorov. And it's the opposite for Miller, right? Maybe Tampa undersold what Miller could do and what he was capable of because he was not great in the postseason for him. And to be like Miller wasn't great in the postseason for the Rangers either. I mean, I remember looking at his stats prior to, him being in the playoffs with the Canucks, and they're pretty pedestrian. Like I believe he has, if you look at the stats here, look, he has 3 and 26 points in 61 career playoff games with the Rangers in Tampa. 3 goals in 61 career playoff games. He has 9 and 30 games with the Vancouver Canucks and has 30 as well. So again, he's a different player in Vancouver, but he just couldn't find that in Tampa. Couldn't find that next switch. So, and we talked a lot about that good regular season when he got there. Conference finals, he could have been way better, despite the fact, especially with him playing with Kucherov and Stamkos. His only full season in Tampa was kind of mediocre too. He had 47 points, and if you look at where he ranked in terms of ice time, he was 7th among forwards. Right, Kucherov, Point, Tyler Johnson, Steven Stamkos, Andre Palat, Yanni Gord, all average more ice time per game than JT Miller.
What a stacked team, dude.
It was a stacked team, right? It's crazy that they got swept in the first round by Columbus, but Yeah, so Miller again, a kind of a pedestrian regular season, 47 points in 74 games, 2 assists in those 4 playoff games, and then he becomes a cap casualty in the summer because this, despite the fact that Tampa extended him, gave him that contract at 5 years, 5.25 million a season. He wasn't really delivering or a core part of that team, and you can easily say that the Rangers lost that trade. I mean, the Rangers effed up. They effed up trading Miller for nothing. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, I mean, they got a first-round pick. They flipped that for Blake Coleman, who helped them win a Stanley Cup. So it's hard to say Tampa lost the trade because of how good JT Miller's been, but they didn't really lose the trade because they won Stanley Cups. So
they didn't
that's
lose
all
the
that really
trade.
matters at the end of the day.
It's neutral, right? Both teams won this trade. And again, do you have the exact details on the trade before I go in on it? It was JT Miller going to Vancouver for just the first, or like what else was it? It was just
so it was JT Miller for that conditional first-round pick and a third-round pick. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. And I think Marek Mazanek, a minor league goalie, was what came the other way. So, yeah, exactly. So JT Miller for Marek Mazanek, a round 3 pick, and a first-round pick as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I remember when that happened. I think I've told the story on the program before as well. Just like chilling with my mom, watching day 2 of the draft and just being absolutely rattled. And, even going back in time right now, I feel as if 95%, I wouldn't say 95%, but let's say the Canucks had like an Alvin at the time or a Rutherford and this trade was going down. I think they would understand fully that this guy struggled in the playoffs. He had 40-something points on one of the best teams in NHL history. He's at the time getting overpaid, and Tampa needs to get him off their books. And here's Benning giving, at the time, luxury for him. Like, what is there another world where the Canucks are the team that's actually getting, quote unquote, even more than JT Miller back to help Tampa Bay out, right? Because we see these cap casualty trades all the time, and these type of guys go away for free. And here's Benning giving like the biggest piece. So I wonder what you feel about that. Like are other GMs, making this trade, obviously, but are they giving up way less?
100% they are. And I think that narrative still holds true. I mean, I don't say this often, but in terms of the JT Miller trade, thank you, Jim Benning. I mean, you overpaid. You were a crappy negotiator. You shouldn't have given up a first-round pick, but it didn't really matter because JT Miller has turned into an absolute superstar for your Vancouver Canucks. But yeah, it was a complete overpayment at the time. Kyle, I'm thinking let's hit the break.
I was sorry to cut you off. I was so mad. I was so over being a Canucks fan because of this trade. I was so over Jim Benning be the man who controlled so much of my morale, You know what I'm saying? Like, this guy had my heart in his hands and he would always just like crumple it. And you said something so important there. He was just so bad at negotiating. It's so obvious that with Jim Benning, whatever came first got done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And in this case, I guarantee whoever the GM was, I guess it was Eichmann, right? Before he goes to Detroit, like right before he goes to Detroit. I don't know if Eichmann just left right, like literally like a month after this trade happened out of nowhere. But man, oh man, what a time, man. What a time to be a Canucks fan, okay? Look at this comment, okay, before we get to the third segment, okay? It comes from SK93, one love to Surrey. I think this guy's from Surrey. Who knows? Maybe I'm just assuming. But he's saying, who is a bigger Canucks villain, Jim Benning or Mark Messier? You know what? We're going to save that for another episode. SK, whatever amount of money we make from that episode, we're going to drop later in the summer. You're making it because you just produced the show.
Let's go. Shout out to SK and shout out for all of you for tuning into this episode of Locked On Canucks. Hey, if you haven't done so already, go subscribe, mother.
People, we back doing this, and that's giving you some Locked On Canucks. Yes, your team every day here at the Don't Doze Art Lab. Speaking of which, go check us out at don'tdoze.com, DONTDOZE.com. If you want to know what the West Coast bias is all about, man, oh man, JT Miller, a Vancouver Canuck for a long time. It wasn't that long ago where this guy chose to stay in Vancouver, right? Gets an 8-year deal. Looks like an underpayment right now. Again, 13, 14 months ago when that deal is signed. Was it? No, that deal was signed about 2 years ago. It just kicked, right? What was that deal signed? Was it signed?
Yeah, it was like one of Patrick Elvin's first big signings.
So it happens. he gets the extension again. Like I know I'm fast forwarding just a bit, but it's still ironic how, again, this video is called "How JT Miller Became the Face of the Franchise" when 14 months ago, 18 months ago, bro, we want this guy to be another cap casualty in the world of sport. You know what I'm saying? Like it's crazy how not that long ago it's JT Miller for Schneider and a first round pick and a third round pick from the Rangers. There's so much irony with JT Miller being the man for your Vancouver Canucks. Speaking of which, he gets traded to Vancouver and he still has to develop a lot to get to this point. And in my opinion, looking back at it, that seemed like mission impossible. It really did. 3 head coaches, all this jazz, bad team. And here's JT Miller transforming into, again, the face of the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, and I think, people know the story about JT Miller in Vancouver a bit better, which is, I think, why I wanted to highlight, how he got to Vancouver and what he went through coming to Vancouver. But, when he came to Vancouver, he was, you look at his stats, you look at how he was deployed. He was an offense-first guy. He was never a guy that killed penalties. He was never a guy that had tough matchups. And he wanted that responsibility. And there was this interesting quote from his mom in another interview. And I'll say a lot of this came from Harman work at The Athletic a couple of years ago. He had a great piece on JT Miller. Snagged from some other sources too. But this quote from JT Miller's mom was pretty impressive. She basically said something along the lines of, I wanted to get Travis Green's number through JT Miller's agent so I could text him and thank him for listening and communicating with my son. Really his mom was saying that Travis Green was at that moment the best coach that JT Miller had ever had. Because, he butted heads with Elaine Vigneault. He butted heads with coaches in the AHL as well. But he came to Vancouver and Travis Green was willing to give him that responsibility, was willing to elevate him up the lineup, was willing to, try playing him at center at a time when, Pettersson was a rookie and was having, some struggle in the faceoff dot, putting Miller at center on that line, on the Lotto line for a ton of faceoffs. I think it was for Pettersson development. And, Miller began to center during his last season with the Rangers and played some center with Tampa, but really started to turn into a face-off ace of the Vancouver Canucks. That first season in Vancouver, his win percentage in the face-off dot, 59.2%. I mean, that guy, he earned the right to be a center with how good he was in the face-off dot. And because of that, the Canucks were able to get the puck often first off the shift and have a lot of zone time. And obviously the chemistry between Miller, Besser, and Pettersson was pretty unreal in his first season in Vancouver. And really, it's like right from the jump, this guy was successful in Vancouver. He was, again, a second line winger for most of his NHL career. But you look at when he first came to Vancouver, he had 14 points in the month of October, 13 points in the month of November. The guy had 27 points in the first 2 months of the season, despite only having 47 points the entire season before that. So, again, JT Miller was so consistent, so good throughout that season. Bit of a dip in December, but aside from that, the guy was just rock solid right up until COVID hit. And the playoffs, too.
Yeah, going back to JT Miller's first season with the Canucks, the amount of astonishment I felt watching this guy play was pretty much at an all-time high when it comes to being proven wrong, because he was exceptional offensively, making things happen. And you could see that this guy had the instinct of offense. He had the ability to make other players play his game. And then he also had this great shot and this great playmaking ability. And it's like, why did Tampa get rid of this guy? Why did the Rangers get rid of this guy? This guy's actually really, really, really good. And, if we're going to talk about JT Miller, we have to talk about Travis Green and just to tie Pettersson and Miller together again, because I feel as if these two will be tied together forever, right? I mean, again, we're going to win a Stanley Cup with these guys. Think about it. The image of having 2 number 1 centers on one team, it just, again, you want to talk about Quinn Hughes being a Norris Trophy winner and that being a luxury? Your Canucks have JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, okay? Locked up long term. That's a poor man's Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, and I'll take that. I really will. Anyways, the fact that Travis Green turns Pettersson into a center too right away and Miller at the same time, because that was a big thing. That was a big thing. Remember that? Pettersson coming to camp oh, is this guy going to play center? Holy crap. If the Canucks win a cup, Travis Green, you get a ring. You get a Stanley Cup ring, because that's franchise-altering coaching. It really is.
Yeah, and again, obviously Travis Green had his flaws in this market, and by the time he gets fired, it kind of run his course 5 years in. But he was huge for JT Miller's development and Pettersson's too, like you mentioned, Colin. That can't be forgotten. And JT Miller didn't really kill penalties that first season under Travis Green, but in that forgettable 2020-21 season, JT Miller did start to take on some penalty killing responsibility. And, really, he's been up and down in the penalty kill. We all know that. But
he's not that
he
good.
did lead the league or tie for the league lead in terms of shorthanded goals during the 2022-23 season. So, again, it was thanks to Travis Green that JT Miller is a center for your Vancouver Canucks, despite, a lot of pundits in this market saying JT Miller can't play center. Get JT Miller off the penalty kill. I've been kind of one of the get JT Miller off the penalty kill guys, but he does bring it offensively, and he just brings a different element.
Rightfully so, though. Like, again, prior to this season, I know we're skipping over some of Bruce Boudreau, and I'm curious to see what you think Boudreau did for Miller. But again, prior to this season specifically, JT Miller's a below average defensive player. Egregious mistakes, like a lack of emotion when it comes to playing defense. And I think a lot of that has to do with him being emotional and hating losing. For real, like the Canucks suck ass. This guy's hyper competitive, loves to win, hates losing, and now he's playing in this system. It'd be hard to back check for a guy again that has some of those quote unquote toxic traits, right? And here Rick Tocchet comes saving his life. But before Rick Tocchet comes and changes his whole career, he has Bruce Boudreau for a bit. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy went Alain Vigneault. Then he went to Cooper in Tampa Bay, two legendary coaches, quote unquote. I guess Alain Vigneault's not a legendary coach, but you get what I'm saying? Higher echelon coaches, and now he's going with it with Bruce Boudreau. You know what I'm saying? He had Travis Green, now he has Bruce Boudreau, and how does JT Miller develop? I thought 28-year-olds, 29-year-olds don't develop. I thought they reached their peak. You know what I'm saying? And here he is, still getting better, and a little bit of that has to do with whatever Bruce Boudreau was doing with JT Miller.
Yeah, 100%. And you look at how JT Miller performed under Bruce Boudreau, and he was phenomenal, right? That was the season he had 99 points. And I think there's something to be said about how the feel-good, vibey coach and Bruce Boudreau did bring a different element out of JT Miller, because, that he wasn't really bad to start the season under Travis Green there, but he definitely had a different level once Boudreau took the helm there, right? And again, posting 99 points that season, even though the Canucks were too far out of the dance to really make any noise. He was one of the best players in the NHL that season. And it goes back to trust, right? And I think early in his career, I don't think JT Miller had a trusting relationship with the head coach, right? Him and Alain Vigneault, they kind of figured it out eventually, but they still butted heads. He obviously had some trust under Cooper, then it felt like it was probably taken away when he goes from playing with Stamkos and Kucherov to being a third liner in Tampa Bay. And then he comes to Vancouver, and all of a sudden, Travis Green's trusting him and giving him responsibility. Boudreau recognizes him as a leader, plays the wheels off of him. And then Tocchet comes in. And I think Rick Tocchet, shares a lot in common with JT Miller in terms of their playing styles and their personalities. And I think he's brought another level out of JT Miller as well.
How does
and I think the other big element too about
again, sorry to cut you off, but this is a lesson for you and I, because we're going through this in our lives, right? 30, 31, 32. You get what I'm saying? And the ability for him to not have an ego and listen and just get better, even though this is the third effing head coach in a handful of years for this guy. This guy's already been through so much in his career. And for him to just buckle down and believe that Rick Tocchet, who sucked as a head coach, quote unquote, right? He did some work with Arizona, making them a little bit better. But you know what I'm saying? It's not like this guy's the guy, the Bill Belichick of the NHL, and he has to go listen to this guy, yet there he is doing it. And JT Miller this season, statistically, yeah, it was his best season, but defensively, how did he just transform into being 46 overall when it comes to defensive awareness and defensive effort to at least 80 to 90 consistently the whole way through? That to me is mission impossible. That to me is why he's the number one center. And that to me is why he's the face of the franchise. You want to talk about grinding your way to the top, like Zarfi's saying right here, right? Zarfi, thanks for the comment. JT Miller grinded his way to the top line. Bro, he grinded his way into becoming a two-way center who puts up 100 points. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. That's mission impossible, and that's JT Miller.
And it's been a slow build, Kyle. Again, he kind of got that number one center duty as soon as he came to Vancouver, which he never had elsewhere in his NHL career. He had more defensive responsibilities, and there was warts there, right? It took JT Miller a couple of seasons. I don't think he was great defensively under Travis Green. I don't think he was great defensively under Bruce Boudreau. It was Tocchet that kind of brought a different level out of him, but he was trusted in those situations at least, even though he kind of was sinking more than swimming early on when he had those tough matchups. I do think he learned something from it, right? And I think JT Miller throughout his career has just added more to his game. You look at his stat sheet, he wasn't a very physical guy when he first came in the NHL. And then all of a sudden he starts chucking the body. All of a sudden he starts taking more faceoffs. Comes to Vancouver, he starts killing penalties. Number one unit at the power play, which he never had in his NHL career before that consistently. More and more through his NHL career, and especially in Vancouver, he's been given more responsibility. And when you give this guy more responsibility, he's so driven and he works so hard that he just ends up figuring it out. And I think that's really the story of JT Miller. And the other, I think the last point I want to make about Miller is just the resiliency, right? This guy was subject of trade rumors for 2 years in Vancouver, went through what he described as a bleep show under Bruce Boudreau, feeling so bad for the guy, calls out media on a podcast saying he doesn't like a lot of Vancouver media and they know who they are. He's gone through in this city. He's gone through some drama. He's gone through some BS, and it hasn't mattered because, again, he's still one of the best damn players in the NHL.
It also doesn't matter for a guy like this because I don't think he has a cell phone. You know what I'm saying? Straight up, man. He blocks out the noise, and Rick Tocchet, man. We got to talk about this, man. Sometime next week. We're coming up with some great topics here, okay? You can argue, and again, I'm theorizing. I'm assuming that the Canucks are going to win the Stanley Cup with this core, and Rick Tocchet being that guy, right? You could argue that making Bruce Boudreau cry was the best decision the Vancouver Canucks ever made because of the head start they got in implementing the professionalism / structure / just will that Rick Tocchet implemented into this organization for 40 games prior to last season. That changed everything. The fact that the Canucks chose Rick Tocchet over Connor Bedard and were okay with making an old man cry just changed everything. And business, man, business is ruthless. And if anyone knows that, it's JT Miller, okay? He's been traded from two pretty sick organizations, pretty sick player. And here he is after 2 head coaches and now with his 3rd with Vancouver, which is crazy, transforming as we speak. And Canucks fans, it was a long episode. It was a lot of talking. And Trevor, you did a great job summarizing everything. Thank you for that because the hockey nerd in me is amped up right now. Like this is just a fascinating story. And what's even more fascinating is, again, I mean what I say here. Yeah, it's great that we have a Norris Trophy winner in Quinn Hughes. Never seen that before here in Vancouver. But the specialty, or like the biggest thing, the biggest X factor for the Vancouver Canucks, it's not Quinn Hughes. And that's crazy for me to say, but it's the fact that the Canucks have JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. If they both hit at the same time, that's magical. And we haven't seen that version of the Vancouver Canucks because, yeah, they were putting up good offensive numbers maybe a couple years ago together, but JT Miller's a completely different player. And Pettersson, when he's on his game, he can still be that 100-point guy, but he could also be that two-way aficionado as well. So then you kind of look at this roster and you're like, holy crap, like the Vancouver Canucks may have 2 of the best 7 centers in hockey, 8 centers in hockey. When I say they have a poor man's Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, I'm not joking. Like, this is pretty incredible if all things go right.
Some might say that maybe it's even better. No, okay, I won't go down that road, but maybe they want to come first. Maybe they'll go down that road.
Let's do it.
Let's go, baby.
I like it. It is better. What am I talking about? Slap me in the face. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are a poor man's Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. What? Let's go win a Stanley. Let's go win a Stanley Cup before that, so we can actually say that.
Yeah, let's go win a Stanley Cup. But I think we should also get out of here, Kyle. Is there any comments you want to shout out? Anything you want to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go.
Just a few that are not really that familiar with the topic. Okay, Gigatronic asking if I'm playing any Yin Yang Twins in my DJ sets. Okay, not yet. Well, what did they have? What's one of their songs? Like that wet song, right? Gonna make the taco wet or whatever. Wow. Come, girl, let me get that. Let me put some sauce on that taco. Yeah. Work that. I'm gonna get that taco wet, right? Some of those things. Okay. Anyways,
man, that's going back in the day, man.
No Yin Yang Twins yet, but hey, Justin Timberlake, aka JT, you damn sure. And Trevor Beggs, if you guys don't know this, he used to be super jealous because his wife loved Justin Timberlake, and he's never listened to Justin Timberlake. But now, since JT Miller became the player he is, he's more open to listening to anything JT. And we'll end it on this note, okay? Aphemus always has some of the comments. Of every episode, the best comments. And he's saying right now, he said it before and I'll say it again, instant legends forever if you win a cup with the Vancouver Canucks, one of the biggest diehard fan bases, and we have no cups yet. It's different with other teams. Yeah, 100%. When these guys win a cup, every one of these guys are going to be faces of the franchise, right? That's the truth. But when JT Miller wins it and lifts that cup up, when he lifts it with that face, like this guy looks like Mr. Hockey, straight up, it's going to hit different. Okay, for real. We're so blessed to have JT Miller. One love to JT Miller, one love to Jim Benning. What? And one love to you and you and you and you. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Have a great weekend. Begsy, you did an incredible job. Good research. And sign us out.
All right. Shout out to the everydayers, occasional listeners, first-time listeners, new subscribers, and those of you who join us on the live show on YouTube. We appreciate the heck out of you. Whenever you're listening, wherever you're listening, Locked On Canucks, we ain't nothing without you. And guess what? We are here every damn day throughout the month of July. And that means we'll see you again on Monday. So for now, I'm Trevor Beggs. That guy's Kyle Bowen. JT Miller, you're the GOAT, buddy. And we will see you next time here on Locked On Canucks.
Peace.
Your Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks, part of the Locked On